And testing 212, is this thing on? Welcome back, guys, to another exciting episode of A Gamer's Guide to Productivity. Today, we have a guest who wears more hats than we can count. Definitely more than I have. From editor to illustrator, radio commentator, travel enthusiast, everything in between. We're going to dive deep. So join me in welcoming the one and only Peter Moore. Peter's
Thanks.
career spanned decades from leading editorial roles at Men's Health magazine and launching innovative publications to now entertaining thousands with his Substack posts and NPR commentary. He has a knack for storytelling and he brings life to his epic travel adventures with quirks of second careers, which I'm definitely going to ask a lot about. And he's a cartoonist. So he's hiking in the Rockies, journaling his thoughts, recounting crazy encounters with a volcano. He has a very interesting life with very interesting tales from all corners of his life. And I can't wait until you guys get to hear all his experiences, insights, and maybe learn a thing or two about creating a well-lived life. So Peter, thank you so much and welcome to the show.
Yeah, after that intro, I'm not sure I can live up to it, but I'll try.
No, I was doing a little bit of research, and I said I need to get you on the show from your journaling to your travels. So for just a basic start, Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I just got off the phone with my son who lives in Brooklyn and hearing about all of his adventures. And it feels like adventures are something that can be passed along in a family. I certainly got them from my dad. I feel like I'm passing them on to my son. And I hope to
Wow.
pass it on to your readers too, or your listeners too.
Oh, that's amazing because they want to know a lot about what you've done. And you've done so much. So let's just start with what inspired your initial desire to be a storyteller?
I think it came from all those trips and all the travel I did when I was a kid. Like from the time I was 5 years old, my dad was loading me and my three brothers up in the car and my mom too, and pointing the nose of the car across the country. So we went on epic vacations when I was a kid. As a probably 6 year old, I was sitting in the back of a station wagon throwing up all the way between Connecticut and Wyoming, which is about a 3 day drive. Um,
Hmm.
but just being part of that kind of, I think of travel as a narrative, as a beginning, a middle, an end. You have a destination in mind, all sorts of interesting people come up. And I would say that my childhood, traveling around as much as I did, inspired a lifetime of travel for me, but also inspired
Hmm.
an interest in all kinds of people, all kinds of experiences. And I was a reader from a young age too. So, not only was I having my own experiences, I was vicariously living through other fictional characters. And I think all of that kind of wrapped up in a ball gave me momentum in my adult life to see as much as I could, experience as much as I could, meet as many people as I could, and then start writing about them, which is kind of a freaky story right there.
So you were traveling a lot and you were reading while traveling. So you were outside of your comfort zone and then you were immersed another world because if you're reading a book, you're immersed in another world. And then with all that, you decided, you know what? I could do that too.
Well, here's the weird thing about it. So I graduated from college. I was an English major, a reader, as had no idea where this was going to take me in life, and I had this idea that really what I needed to do was go to Paris. And I realize I'm not the first guy to think of Paris as being a cool destination when you're a young man. But I went over there with two blank journals that my brother had given me as a graduation college present from college. And
Mm-hmm.
one night, it was October 12th, 1978. For your readers who can operate calculators, you'll know how old I am now. Um, I sat down and I made a journal entry that night on October 12th, 1978. And then on October 13th, I also made a journal entry. And I have made a journal entry every night since October 12th, 1978. And I had
Wow.
no idea where, if anywhere, this was going. But what it means is that I have about 16 million words, or excuse me, 6 million words written in my journals. And, that's the narrative of my lifetime. I wonder how many other people, have been that dogged at it. But I also think that it speaks to, I have been, in a sense, curating the narrative of my own life since that magic night of October 12th, 1978. And, I realize now that, I've done a lot. I live in a great house in Colorado, but really the most valuable possession I have are those, it's probably 65 journals now that carry the story of every day of my life since October 12th, 1978.
Wow, that's actually so impressive. And you travel a lot. So how do you journal while traveling?
Uh, it's I've said that journaling is now a function of my autonomic nervous system. I do it like I breathe and like my heart beats,
Mm,
so that if it gets to be 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the evening, and I haven't yet written in my journal, I
mm-hmm.
know that it's time to go fetch the journal, get my pen out, and think, well, what was remarkable about today? What were my highs? What were my lows? Who did I meet? What interesting conversations was I in? And it's pretty remarkable. And you said it's impressive. I didn't say it to be impressive. I said it because there are things that you can do in your life that over time they seem impressive. And honestly, I'm kind of impressed that I've written 6 million words. But
Mm-hmm.
what's really important about it is that it was important to me. Every day had something special or precious or scary or
Right.
disappointing or depressing. That I got all that down was what my goal was. So, and that was super rewarding to me. So I didn't do it to, impress Nico and tell him that I wrote 6 million words. It's more,
Right.
I wanted to keep track of it because it was important and because I was noticing what was going on. And that's the goal of it. That's the goal in the life, is to really participate and to be part of things and to put yourself out there for people and meet them and get to know them and get to know their stories. So, in writing this lifelong story of my own in 6 million words, I'm also telling the stories of all the people I encounter and what I learn from them, how they disappoint me, how they piss me off, all that stuff, you know, uh, in aggregate becomes the story of a lifetime. And I've written mine in longhand.
And you also, might I add, do cartooning. How does
Yeah,
that come into play?
it's a crazy thing. So I was, I was a big deal magazine editor for most of my career. Playboy magazine and Men's Health were my two biggest gigs. I also was the editor of Backpacker for a while. But, wait a second. Now I got launched into my life story and I can't remember what question you were asking me. I better answer the question, right?
No, I was saying, how does cartooning come
Oh,
into play?
cartooning.
Because
Okay.
you do a lot of
All right.
journaling.
Yeah. 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 So you've heard of the pandemic. That was a
Mm-hmm.
bad thing. I was at the time I was launching it was actually a cannabis magazine. I live in Colorado. Cannabis is a big subject here, and I was launching a magazine about cannabis and health. And
Mm-hmm.
people stopped going to the newsstand because they were cowering at home. So I thought, okay, now what am I going to do? All of my freelance work dried up. Suddenly, I had nothing to do, and I have good friends who I talk to, very frequently. I was talking to them during the pandemic, and they were saying, Peter, you've been telling us that you wanted to write a memoir for such a long time. We're sick of hearing about it. Why don't you just shut up and write the thing now? Because nobody has any work to do, and you might as well work on that. And I'm like, okay, fine, I'll get to work on the memoir. So I opened up my journal from my first days in Paris, and I started telling the story of how I made the jump from snot-nosed college kid into somebody who had a destination in mind in life. And that was what the subject of this memoir was. Because I was spending time in Paris, I was studying French there. I traveled around on the continent a lot. and had all of, for myself, these were amazing experiences. So I got a 100,000 word manuscript done in about 6 months. And then I thought, well, Charles Dickens is one of my favorite authors. And what I always loved about reading Dickens novels was that they had those frontispieces to each chapter that had the main characters of that chapter, and then some narrative implied by the drawing. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun if this memoir I wrote was in 3 parts? Wouldn't it be fun if I just did a frontispiece for each of the 3 parts of the novel? I mean, of the memoir. So I did those, and I thought those were kind of funny. And then I thought, well, I could illustrate scenes within the manuscript. So then I started going through and picking out choice bits that I thought would be amusing. They could be funny cartoons. The cartoons could be commenting on me as narrator of this story. And so I started in on that with the first few chapters. And right around that time is when I discovered Substack. A friend introduced me to it and said, with all the content you produce, you really ought to be on Substack. So I thought, oh, right, memoir, illustration, cartooning. I could combine what I do as a cartoonist with what I do as a writer, and I could see how that plays on Substack. So, so I automatically then, I didn't even realize at the time when I started it, but I was developing credentials as a writer and cartoonist that I didn't have before. And, before I knew it, here's another thing that may be useful to your listeners and the people who are watching this, is that if you can convince yourself, not even have to convince yourself, if you can ignore your terror over new things, over people pointing at you and laughing because you're attempting to do something, if you can shove all that to the side and just say, I'm going to do this because I love it. And I bet if I keep on doing it more and more, I'm going to get better at it. So, the Substack began. And then I thought, well, what I'm doing is actually germane to a lot of publications that are in radio stations that are here in Colorado. So I, out of the blue, I just pitched myself as a cartoonist and columnist to the Colorado Sun, which is a very big deal online newspaper here in Colorado. And, the surprising thing was that after I wrote this up, told the editor of the Colorado Sun what I wanted to do, completed a few drawings to show him what I was about, he wrote me an email back and he said, yeah, we love this. You should do it. And I'm like, really? Yeah, it was like the last thing in the world I expected was that he would go along with it. But then, he hooked me up with one of his editors who was going to be supervising this. And she and I just started having a ball, kicking back and forth ideas for what I would include in my column. And so the very first one that I did, in Colorado, there's a big deal thing this time of year actually called the elk rut, where elk in Rocky Mountain National Park are, getting together to make babies, and the male elk gather together a harem of female elk, and it's all this spectacular show. People flock to the mountains to watch all this go on, and I thought, is this the biggest invasion of privacy ever? To have us all go to Rocky Mountain National Park so that we can watch the elk getting it on. And so I did a bunch of cartoons that I see you're amused. So I did a bunch of cartoons about how wrong this is, that human beings are watching elk sex in Rocky Mountain National Park. And you know what? We put it out there. It got a huge reaction among the readership. And my editor said, people just don't react to cartoons in the Colorado Sun the way they are to yours. And then all of a sudden I realized, this isn't about, do I have the experience? Am I the right guy for the job? Sometimes if you can say with enough conviction, I can do this and it's going to be good, then you're kind of on the spot because you have to make it good at that point. And, I'd had a long career, obviously, before this. So she had reason to believe that I would be able to pull this off. But, once I got started, so I was doing these cartoon columns probably every 2 or 3 weeks in the Colorado Sun. had a lot
Okay.
of material there. And that's when, NPR obviously is a big deal here in the US. And I had a connection at my local NPR station. So I said, hey, I'm doing this for the Colorado Sun. Wouldn't it be great if I did commentaries for you guys? And oh, special bonus, I'm going to do animations along with them. So that not only will I be talking about these things that I find hilarious about living in Colorado, I'll do a little animation to go along with it. And so, yet again, the producer who I was speaking with said, yes, that sounds good. We want you to do it. And then I was like, the next panic came. It was like, oh, except for I told them I know how to do animations and I don't know how to do animations. So I spent a day watching tutorials on YouTube about how to use, I don't know if you're familiar with the illustration program Procreate. I don't know what you
Sounds
use for your
familiar.
cartoon. Yeah, okay.
It
I don't
sounds
know how you,
familiar.
yeah, okay. So Procreate is a New Zealand based app that is terrific for artists. I love it to pieces. And so, a friend of mine, an artist, had introduced me to it. And, when he saw me like using pencil and watercolor on paper, and he said, you could do that a lot more simply with more effects if you were on Procreate. So I bought an iPad, put Procreate on it, the Procreate app, and started doing my illustrations for the Colorado Sun on there. But then I noticed that there was something called Animation Assist, which is a tab you could select, which would help
Mm-hmm.
you build an animation. So it's like, I had no idea how to do this. And I had also just told the people at NPR that, in fact, I would be putting animations with my commentaries. So
Right.
I had no choice. I had to figure it out. And I spent a day sweating bullets at this very desk where you see me sitting now. And by the end of the day, I had actually a pretty cool and funny animation of whatever my commentary. Oh, I know, it was about how much I hate grasshoppers, because in Colorado we have a grasshopper problem. So I did an
Mm.
animation of grasshoppers covering the state map of Colorado, then eating the map, and then like leaf litter filling up the animation frame, and then this giant grasshopper coming toward the screen, looking very menacing. And I sent that in, and they just lost their minds over it. It was like, I've never seen anything like this. And right, I mean, it may sound to everybody like I'm bragging a lot about this. The terror was real, but it also inspired me in a way. You were asking me about my motivation before. One of the best
Mm-hmm.
motivations you can do is to say you're going to do something and
Mm-hmm.
then throw yourself into it and show people who are
Right.
laughing at you that you
Right.
can do it. And the
Yes.
person who I was trying most eagerly to show was myself. I wanted to show
Mm.
me that I could do it. I wanted to show me that even after 3 decades working as a magazine editor and writer, that I still had new ground to cover. And
Hmm.
so between illustrating the memoir and then bridging that over into my freelance work, all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden I had this whole new career that was looking me in the face. And, is it as lucrative as the one I left, that left me behind in magazines? No, it isn't. But, it's not like the magazine world even existed in the way it did, when I worked there for 30 years. So, this whole idea of becoming a cartoonist, an illustrator, a humorist, a radio commentator, a columnist for a newspaper, like, this is all new stuff for me. And if there's anything that I could share with your listeners out there, it's like, you can do these things. Don't don't decide to hem yourself in and decide, oh, I can't do that. That's too hard. That's for people who are smarter or more talented or more hardworking than I am. The fact is that if you make your mind up to really explore something and
Mm-hmm.
to figure it out and see who it is that you admire, and look at their work and see what makes their work tick. If you can stick with it, the ideas will come to you. People always talk about, oh, I need to wait for inspiration to write something. That's the stupidest thing ever. What you need to
Mm,
do is start writing. You have an idea.
mm,
You don't know where it's
mm-hmm,
going to go. That's okay that you
mm-hmm,
don't know where it's go. What you have to do is the only way to find out if that idea is any good is to do it. And I often
mm,
find that, even I'll pitch my editor on, oh, I want to do a cartoon about this. And then I'll get to work on it and I'll realize, oh, that really isn't what this cartoon is about. It's about this other thing. So then
mm,
I'll inform her the whole thing took a right hand turn, but now it's going to be even funnier because it's this, that, and the other.
mm-hmm.
She'll usually go along with it. And it has reinforced with to me the big lesson here, which is just start. Do the thing. Don't talk about the thing. Don't overplan the thing. If there's that thing you want to do it. And then you're going to learn what's important about it, what you do best when you're working on that thing, whatever it is. And that's where things really start to take off and get excited, is when you throw yourself into it, even though you've never done that before, and you figure it out. And that's where the thrills are.
Now, when you were an editor, what challenges did you face from balancing the creativity, but also having to be the responsible editor?
It's a funny thing about, and again, I wouldn't have found this out until I started trying it, but I've always had an explosive number of ideas, maybe an inconvenient number of ideas. I'm now realizing I have more ideas than I'll have lifetime to achieve them. But that's where I
Yeah, it's
found,
hard,
yeah, it is. We've only got our 82 years to do this stuff,
right?
and I've read
Right.
through a lot more of mine than you have through yours. Um, but it's like, so the creative spark is one thing. I've always been able to walk into a room, spew my story ideas, and I had a colleague at Men's Health who used to bring this big stack of ideas with him. And at one point we all said, Joe, like, what's the deal with those big folders? And he said, these are all my ideas, and I'm going to keep on going through them until you guys finally assign them to me. And he was so creative, and he was such a good writer that eventually we did make it through his ideas. And what the other thing is, ideas are a dime a dozen. If you put out an idea, and I go through this with my editors all the time, you put out an idea and they're like, nah, that stinks. That's never going to work. And it's like, okay, well, here's the next one. It's like, ideas are cheap. The work is what obviously takes time, but it's also where the rewards come. So,
Mm,
you don't have to be all up about, oh, they rejected my idea and I'm going to quit now. Of course, they rejected your idea. Your idea was probably stupid. But
mm,
what you need to do is then just be able to pick yourself up, move on to the next idea and the one after
right.
that, and to encourage your brain, to reward your brain with that process of ideation. And that's the most thrilling thing, especially when you're like take an idea and then execute it. So, for my magazine career, I had a great career. I did a lot of stuff, worked for cool magazines, had a lot of great experiences with it. But that was a different time in my life. My wife and I were having babies when we got to Chicago, when I was working for Playboy magazine. We started our family, and it kind of diverted my life for
Hmm.
for a time there, because I knew I needed money. I was a dad. I needed to support this family. I needed to,
Right.
have the money available to send those kids off to college. So, there was a long stretch in there where I was having a very successful career as a magazine editor, but but what being a magazine editor means is that you sublimate yourself into what the magazine is, what its readers want. So,
Mm.
when I took the job at Playboy, um, all my college friends said, Peter, if we had taken a vote in the senior class about the classmate least likely to go work for Playboy, you would have won hands down, because I wasn't a sexy guy. I wasn't like Hugh Hefner. It's not like that, like I was a party boy even, but I had the word skills that I needed to, and the ideas, so that when I went into that interview with Playboy, they were like, yeah, we want this young guy to work with us. And there were issues of Playboy, where I edited the Playboy interview with Michael Jordan. At the same time, I was producing a bunch of features, some of which I would write too, so that it was like, because I could go off in a lot of different directions, then people asked me to do a lot of different things. And that's another thing that I would suggest to your readers, is that, becoming overly fixated on this one thing I'm gonna do. I feel like the generalist is the one who has the most fun in life, because you're doing a lot of different things. So
Right.
that, my stable of magazines that I write for and illustrate for now is very broad. And at Backpacker magazine, they think of me as this mad hiker, because I've done that in my life too. But at the Colorado Sun, they think of me as a skier, because I often do cartoons about skiing and the ridiculousness of
Right.
that, and about music. And I feel like there's so many of my interests that I can pick from one from column A, one from pursuing it, for much of my lifetime. So, I think that idea of, if you're a person who can pursue broad interests, it's going to take you down some fascinating paths. And that's what I would encourage your listeners to do is, don't stop with just that one thing. Okay, you're great at gaming, but what do you know about the technology of gaming? What do you know
Mm,
about the narratives that are built into games? What do you know
mm,
about graphic novels, which are the novel version of gaming,
mhm.
because they contain a narrative, conflict, etc. So, what I would recommend to anybody who wants to live an interesting life is to be an interested person, is to reach
Right.
out, talk to the people you admire, find out what that crazy guy is muttering about on the subway. The more conversations you have that way, the more possibilities open up to you in life, and you can pursue those.
And for somebody that's had many roles, what would you say for somebody that is thinking and teetering on the edge of switching careers later on in life?
I Men's Health, we ran an article about that whole career conundrum, and there are studies out there that say that the average person will go through about 7 or 8 different jobs over the course of a career. So if you're not planning on the next thing, you're not doing your job. So
Mm,
what I was always doing is, so my very first job out of college, I was writing 75 and 150 word entries for an encyclopedia, which
wow.
sounds super boring, right? Writing for an encyclopedia. But the whole time I was doing that, what I was thinking was, how am I going to pitch myself for the next job based on what
Mm,
I'm doing in this one? So,
mm,
I would, so what I was doing all the time I was working on that encyclopedia was, you know, how is this going to be applicable to the next person who I try to get hired to hire me? And
mhm.
I saw an advertisement in the New York Times for a movie magazine in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I thought, okay, how am I going to pitch myself to this movie magazine based on writing a bunch of really boring entries in for a encyclopedia? And so what I did was, the resume has to be like the most tedious form of literature in history, right? It's just terrible, a resume.
Right.
So at the time I was contemplating my next move, I thought, oh, there's a super bestseller out at this, when I was a young guy. There's a super popular bestseller out called The Book of Lists. And it was what it sounded like interesting, quirky lists of this, that, and the other. So I thought, oh, I know, I'm going to write the resume of lists based on who I am. So every
Mm,
resume, because you're instructed to do so, is exactly 1 page long, right? Mine was 10 pages long. And
sheesh.
it had all sorts of crazy lists about things I had done, the books I had read, the articles I had written for this encyclopedia, which I made sound a lot more interesting than they actually were. And, so I sent that out to 100 magazine editors, and 92 of them ignored it. And 8 of them said, this is the craziest thing I have ever seen. Who are you? And that launched a conversation that led to my first magazine job. So
Wow.
yeah, so it's like, you know, I did exactly the wrong thing. I did what I was forbidden to do, which was to write something that was more than the most boring form of the resume. But because
Mm-hmm.
I did that, I was able to attract the people who I would want to work with because they
Mm.
appreciated it too. They didn't want to read that boring resume any more than I wanted to write it. But because
Right.
I came up with a resume of lists, all of a sudden I was on their radar. And that's what led to my first magazine job in New York. So I was after the encyclopedia thing ended, I was working in a restaurant in Bath, Maine, because I had to make money somehow. And so on a Tuesday, I was serving lunch to ladies who lunch in Bath, Maine. On the following Monday, I was interviewing Walter Cronkite, who was a big deal in the news back in the day, about
Mm-hmm.
his visions of the future. So it was just like, how did this happen? It happened because I wouldn't accept, the boring format that was being handed to me as a job seeker. I reinvented the resume to the point that I landed an interview and was able to tap dance my way through that to the point where they wanted to hire me. And I was just a young kid at the time. I was hired as a assistant editor or something at this magazine that is long dead now. But it got me started. It was, and once I got going on that job, which lasted about a year, then I was thinking the whole time I was there is like, what skills do I need to develop here that are going to be applicable to the next turn in my career? And after this magazine, it was called Next. Um, I was in line at Unemployment New York, and the clerk up front was kept on saying next, next, next for the people who are coming up in the line. I was thinking, boy, if somebody put this detail in a novel, nobody would believe it. But anyway, I'm losing track of myself here. So while I was doing that job as a writer at Next magazine, I was thinking, well, where do I want to go for the next job? Another ad in the New York Times looking for editors for at a movie magazine, and I was able to, craft my responsibilities as a short item writer to saying, I could do that for you only about the movies. And because I was a big deal magazine editor in New York, or that's what they thought of me anyway, even though
Right.
I was truly a pipsqueak, they brought me on as an associate editor there. I worked for I guess I shouldn't. Anyway, I was in difficult circumstances on that job, but pretty soon my boss had the idea that, Peter's much better than that person who's giving him trouble, so I'm going to get rid of that editor and promote
Mm-hmm.
him into that job. And you know, there it was again. I had another opportunity to learn something, and I got lucky 4 years later because Playboy was looking for somebody who had experience with celebrity profiles, and that's what I'd been doing for 4 years. So I made this leap from an encyclopedia to an obscure little movie magazine to what was at the time one of the behemoths of journalism. And again, it was a matter of reinventing myself based on the flop sweat of, I don't even know if I can do what they want me to do, but I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to try and do it the most creative way I possibly can, to work really hard at it, and to bring all of my ideas forward, and that worked. So it's a matter of not accepting the hand that life has dealt you. I mean, honestly, I could still be a waiter at fancy restaurants, and there are places where you can make a living at that. But if I had accepted that as my fate, I never would have experienced all the other amazing stuff that happened to me. So it's a matter of being very lively and active, whatever phase you are in life, no matter how much you even love it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the next thing? Where am I going with this? What new skill should I take on so I can explore that new thing? And it's been one terrifying leap after another for me. But you know, I land because I've had practice leaping and landing.
Now, I definitely want to get a little bit more insight because you skipped on right over it like it was nothing. You mentioned a lot of fearlessness in the face of rejection from a lot of submissions. How do you stay positive when you get 92 no's? And how do you have the willpower and the mental fortitude to say, you know what, I can try one more?
Yeah, I'm too stupid to accept that that the 92 92 people are right. And you know, I had sympathy for those 92 people. One time, this was a great experience. So talk about dealing with adversity. So after the job at Next was coming to an end, a mentor of mine there set me up with an interview with the bureau chief of Time Magazine in Washington, D.C., right? This is a big deal. You know, this wasn't that long after Watergate. Time Magazine was right at the center of all that. It was the most important magazine in the US, and I was having an interview with the Washington bureau. So I get in there, meet this guy who had obviously had about 6 martinis at lunch because I could see instantly. I walked into the room, he was drunk. But I was still trying to impress the guy, talking about my experience, what I'd done. And I swear the man fell asleep while he was interviewing me.
Wow.
So then what do? Do you wake the guy up? That's kind of embarrassing for him, right? Or do you just like talk extra loud so that he like snaps too? And I think, you know, I just paused there for a moment and I thought, well, this is hilarious. And I have to wake the guy up in such a way as to not embarrass him. So I did start speaking louder. He woke up. I didn't get the job. And I just have a good story to tell. But, you know, it's like that kind of thing. You know, you have to have sympathy for what these other people are going through. He obviously, you know, he was like he had a high stress job working for Time Magazine in Washington. I understood that. I also knew that I probably wasn't his ideal candidate for the job. But you know, it was a great experience, and you know, I kept on moving around, and that's when eventually I was able to land the job for the movie magazine. That was the one that I did get, even though I wasn't working for Time Magazine, and that was an amazing experience too. And I was able to broaden my chops as a writer. Then we got in a terrible manuscript cover story about Cheech and Chong, you know, the cannabis comedians. And I just said to my boss at the time, well, this is terrible. How about if I try to rewrite it and make it, you know, good enough to publish? And I did that over the course of a weekend and, you know, typed it up on Monday morning. And all of a sudden people were looking at me differently because they were like, oh, this dude can write. And why isn't he writing more for us? So, you know, again, we had a big problem. Cheech and Chong feature was terrible. I solved it by revising it and rewriting it in a livelier manner that was appropriate to Cheech and Chong. And, you know, it started me in a whole different direction in my career as a feature writer and editor. And, you know, sometimes those opportunities come out of failure, and you have to be looking in the failure to see, well, what part of this can I salvage and make it work going forward? But, you know, I don't mean to say that I'm impervious to rejection or that I don't feel that. I feel it in my heart. You know, it's like, yeah, I wasn't kidding about when I approached the Colorado Sun. I thought, well, there's no way that they're going to accept me as a columnist and cartoonist, but I might as well try. And that willingness to try in the face of near certain disaster that's a skill too that you can develop. So it's like, yes, I'm going to fail. I'm going to put the failure over there. Now I'm going to concentrate on the thing that I'm going to fail at, but I might as well concentrate on that and see if I can figure out the right way to do this, or see if I can find a way through that other people aren't finding. And, you know, that spark of creativity and my willingness to work hard at having a creative life and creative endeavors has, you And it's the whole what is it? Success is 2% inspiration, 98% perspiration. I think Mark Twain said that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely true. And you need both. You need the inspiration, but the
Right.
inspiration isn't enough. You need the willingness to work hard and realize the inspiration and see where it's going.
And then in your case, what role do you think fitness plays in your life, and how do you think it's impacted your creative journey? Because we mentioned you've done skiing, you've done hiking, you've been to a lot of national parks. I heard you went to a volcano. And so how has doing all these fitness related activities, how do you think that's impacted your creative journey, and how important is it to you to maintain your health?
Well, one thing we haven't talked about is that for 20 years, yes, that's 2 decades, I was an editor at Men's Health magazine. I was hired from Playboy to join Men's Health. And, it was an amazing moment in my life because, in the history of publishing, Playboy, when I was there, was kind of starting to do that, whereas
Mm-hmm.
Men's Health was kind of doing that. And when I went
Mm,
to my boss at Playboy and said, well, they've hired me to be the new managing editor of Men's Health magazine, he like shook his head and he said, "Boy, you are climbing onto a rocket," and which is what happened to me at Men's Health. Now, I was always a fit guy. I was always a runner, a basketball player, a skier, a hiker. At Men's Health, um, it is what it sounds like. It's a health magazine for men, and
right.
there were we there were a lot of aspects to that. Sports was one of them, and sports fitness was one of them. And I signed on at Men's Health and was in the middle of all these super fit, and I got in the best shape of my life, and suddenly found myself running marathons and writing about them. And it was a whole
Wow.
different, I was just making this whole new leap in life toward what is really important in men's lives.
Mm,
It's their sense of control over what they're doing. It's
mm,
their psychology, their emotional lives. It's their physical health. It's their relationships. All of those things are so important to uh, living a fulfilling life. And once again, I found myself in clover because I was editing and writing articles about all the most important things in my life and learning how to do them better. So at Men's Health, it was a lot of it was a fitness magazine, but it was a much broader reach than that. And it was also tremendously. It was just going through an amazing boom. When I started there, it had probably 800,000 subscribers. By the end of by the time they threw me out, 20 years later, it was over 2 million. It was the biggest men's magazine in the world, bigger than GQ and Esquire combined. And,
mm.
that took me down a lot of paths that I wouldn't have gone down otherwise. And, fitness has been a part of it because that's part of living a thrilling life is to be able to hang the tips of your skis over the edge of a precipice at Mammoth Mountain and think, I can get down that slope. And, that all has been amazing for me. But I don't know if you saw it in the bio I sent you, but I came back from a run one day, and you're all filled with endorphins when you come back from a run. And I thought,
Mhm.
I am the editor of Men's Health magazine. I'm going to write the White House and tell them that I need to speak with Barack Obama for a cover story in Men's Health magazine. Typity, typity, type. Send off the email. I'm like sitting there thinking, well, that's ridiculous. That's never going to happen. I swear that afternoon, the head of the White House Press Association typed it back and said, yeah, we'd love to see Obama on the cover of Men's Health. So then came 4 months of negotiations, which ended up with me on, they called it O Force One. It was his campaign plane. So we had him on the cover of Men's Health in November of 2008,
Wow.
right when the election was coming down. So it was like I was, I was sitting on the airplane talking to the one guy in the world who everybody wanted to talk to there. And it was me sitting across from him, which was
Right.
kind of mind blowing. And then a year later, He was in the White House, obviously. He had just won the Nobel Prize, and they were fighting about healthcare. Um, and I was the editor of a health magazine. So why wouldn't I propose to Obama that he speak with me again? I still had my contacts from the first time I spoke with him because they all moved into the White House. And, then I was, again, I was like sitting in a park, like looking at the White House thinking, okay, in 20 minutes, I'm going to go up to that gate and tell them I have an appointment with the president. And then it was 15 minutes to go. And it's like, you can imagine, Washington makes you sweat anyway, but the thought of like walking into the White House to talk to the president of the US, it was mind blowing to think of that.
Right.
But eventually I did go up to the gate. They walked me in there. I walked by Wolf Blitzer. He was doing a stand up for CNN. It's just like, what world is this that this is all happening? And they bring me in. They take me up in an elevator in the White House, and I'm just sitting around kibitzing with the staffers who in those offices, and they get a phone call and say, okay, the president is ready to see you now. And we step out into this long hallway, and down at the end of the hallway, I see this lanky guy sitting on a desk, chatting with the people in the room. I think, oh my goodness, that is Barack Obama. And I had, about 20 seconds of walking down the hallway to get to him. But you know what? Great guy, stood up, enveloped me with his wonderful handshake and said, good to see you again, which he was pretending at that point, of course, that he remembered that I'd interviewed him a year earlier on O Force One, but that he even cared enough to say that, I'm charmed by. And then we walked into the Oval Office, something nobody ever expects to do, including me. And, he gestures at that seat. And those pictures you see of the president, he's in one chair and like
Right.
the president of France is in the other one. I was in the other chair where the president of France usually sits. I didn't talk to him for that long. I was probably in the Oval Office for 20 minutes, but it was a mind-blowing 20 minutes and the most, kind of an amazing thing to be able to do that. And also to bring that man to the readers of Men's Health was really a great privilege. And, considering, well, there've been a lot of people who've been in the White House, and I'm glad I've talked to that one.
That's actually really impressive. That journey that like literally just started from clippings of encyclopedia and wanting to do a little bit more and having the courage and not being cowardly on the exterior, because I'm sure sometimes you must have felt like there's no point, why do it? And it's like, as you mentioned, put the fear, put the rejection to the left, and then just do and focus on what you have to do. Now, there's so much that I want to ask, but I will ask one more question here. For everything that you've experienced, this amazing, well fulfilled life of so much different activity, different experiences, different stories, different adventures, and a journey that still has not stopped. What piece of advice would you give for somebody who is listening, who might be, a keyboard warrior, somebody that sits on the computer all day, and they're listening to that and say, oh my goodness, you're a creative and you're living such an adventurous life. What do I have to do to start that journey?
So you need to listen inside yourself and respect what you're hearing. So I have nothing against keyboard warriors. There are people who were born to be a keyboard warrior and are amazing at it and can build a beautiful career out of that and have adventures because they have those skills. I'm not denigrating that at all. What I'm saying is that if there's a voice inside you that's saying, you know, I've got this job and it's pretty good, but I could imagine something that would be more rewarding, fulfilling to me. Heed that voice, listen to it,
Mhm.
see what skills it's suggesting that you need to pick up or what new experiences you need to have to qualify you to do that next job. So,
Mm.
or to have that next adventure. So, a lot of times when we get kind of buried in, yeah, my job is terrible. I'm not getting paid enough. I don't respect the person I work for. I'm stuck. You are never stuck unless you agree to be stuck. So,
Mm.
what I would urge that keyboard warrior who's not satisfied with this is to look beyond it. See what else there is in the world. See what's out the window. See what your good pal who you knew as a kid is doing now and is really hyped up about. Find that thing that's going to hype you up, and it's not. You're not going to leap right into that. That doesn't happen to anyone. You're gonna you're gonna dream your way into it. You're gonna work your way into it. But the dreaming and the working, if they're joined together, are such a rewarding way to live. And that's what I would urge on the people who are listening to this.
Oh my goodness, Peter. Thank you so much for sharing all these amazing stories, these behind the scenes of how some of these interviews of yours actually came about, how you stayed relentless in the face of rejection. Many of us listening to that might not be as impervious to hearing no's a lot, but now that we know that you just got to bypass the no because it's going to happen, you're not going to mesh and get along with absolutely everyone. But as long as you listen to that voice that is prodding you on, it's letting you know that there's more out there. Definitely, that's something insightful. Guys, if you listened to all these amazing travel adventures, to the joys of cartooning, the joys of writing, the joys of editing, the joys of wanting to do more, embracing new careers, not being okay with the status quo, for me at least, the journey reminds me of the importance of staying curious, pursuing what I love, even taking the opportunity to maybe take something that might not have been something that you expected because, you know, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonades, right? When life gives you an unexpected turn, you want to make sure that you drift with it. So, if you guys want to keep up with Peter's work, the Substack is at the bottom. Check out his work. There's a lot of artwork on his site as well, and there's a lot of animation. You can also catch his work at the Colorado Sun or NPR. As always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like today's episode, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And definitely share that with somebody that could also use a little adventure and creativity in their life. And still, until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and never stop creating your own story. See you in the next episode. It's Nico Penguin at Gamer.